Thank you for joining us. Wisconsin Swimming is proud to offer our second feature by Dr. Mona about adopting a healthy swim philosophy for success. This one is aimed towards our athletes. Our first one was aimed towards the parents. So I'm going to turn it over to Mona. Thank you for joining.
Awesome, thank you. I look forward to talking to all the athletes. I often think that they are at the center of all of this, and we want to make sure that us professionals kind of help them out in the best possible way. So just to get us started, so I'll give you a little bit of background to my sport and my sport psychology. I used to be a competitive figure skater. I was born and raised in Finland. I also played competitive flag football there. And then I ran varsity track and field to get my letterman's jacket when I was an exchange student in Riverside, California. Upon returning back to Finland, I became a professional figure and synchronized skating coach for about 7 years before I then sold my house and car and moved to the UK and to study sport and performance psychology. As a consequence of that, I've become a sport and performance psychology professor, and I have experiences doing that in the US, in the UK, Finland, and Germany. And I also provide sports psychology services to athletes in different sports at different levels. My swimming background is a little bit weaker than the other parts. My fastest 1,000 meters that I have ever swam, it was with the old lady with the blue hair, breaststroke style, so never putting my head underwater, and it took me 29 minutes. So clearly I'm not a great swimmer at all. I'm also a swim parent to Ami. Ami swam for Shorewood Swim Club and Shorewood High School, and now swims for Brown University and the Gambia national team. I'm also a USA Swimming certified official, and I still officiate for Shorewood Swim Club, and I do sports psychology consultancy with swimmers, and I currently serve Wisconsin Swimming as the Safe Sport Chair. That brings me to the whole point of why we're here. As part of the Safe Sport mission, we in Wisconsin Swimming have decided to take a little bit of a proactive approach to how do we keep athletes safe in sport, and how do we create an environment that fosters that ability to be yourself, strive for goals, and become really successful in what you do. And in a way that is consistent with the Wisconsin Swimming core values, that the whole process is fun, you can get your achievements, and the whole idea is safe and inclusive. As Angela mentioned, I already did one about for the parents. So we did about raising children who swim and top 10 tips from sports science. So today I'm taking the second stab of this, and we'll talk about adopting a healthy swim philosophy for success. And again, I'm giving you top 10 tips from sports science and how we kind of move forwards from there. Just to put this into a little bit of a context, I believe that the sport, swimming or any other, happens in this sort of cycle of different systems. And right now we're going to focus on you as the athlete who's in the middle as the individual. And the other ones that we've done focuses on those interpersonal microsystems where the family and friends and all of those other people are surrounding yourself and influence your sports experience. So today's goal, I've got 2 main goals. I'm going to share my top 10 tips from sports science on some of the ways in which you can adopt a really healthy swim philosophy for success. And then I'm going to teach you 2 important phrases in Finnish because that's my first language. I do have a couple of disclaimers before we start. Everything that I'll talk about is rooted in sports science, and that means psychology. It can be in physiology and all of the other different sports science domains. But everything that I share is also influenced by professional and personal experiences. I'm also creating supplemental infographics, which will be available from Wisconsin Swimming after this webinar. And I'll give you the full list of citations and sources should you want to seek more information about the things that I'm covering. All right, let's get going. So the first top tip is being an athlete is like riding a seesaw. Everybody knows seesaws from the early childhood, and when you're on the one end of it, you always want to be the one who controls it, rather than being the one who's controlled by the other side. In the same way, sport performance is like a seesaw. If you look at the top board, on one end, there's the peak performance, and on the other hand, there is the injury. So how that kind of works is that at any given time as an athlete, you're somewhere along that continuum. You're either aiming for that peak performance, or you may be somewhere recovering from an injury or illness or something like that. The goal is obviously to spend more time on the side of the peak performance, but we all know that swimming is a sport where those peak performances happen usually at the end of season or potentially in a mid-season meets where you are tapering to try to see where you at that point. Just like any other seesaw, our sports seesaw also balances on three key sort of what I would say a base triangle sides. One of the sides is the technical and tactical side. That's usually the things that you do either during dry land or things that you do in a pool, and can include things like race strategy, stroke efficiency, stroke techniques, the ways in which you train, your training attendance, and the things that the efforts and intensities that you put into it when you're actually doing what is part of the sport of swimming. On the other side is the physical and biological factors. Some of those we can control and some of them we can't. So for example, our age, our gender, biological sex, how tall we are, if we have a really long wingspan, all of those things will have a role and enhance in the ways in which you're going to navigate your balancing on the seesaw between injury and peak performance. Same way, it can be things like sleep. What kind of nutrition you eat? Are you hydrating yourself well enough? Are you often sick? Do you have any underlying conditions such as asthma? All of those things are factors that you may have to navigate and balance when it comes to then the technical or tactical aspects as well. And at the bottom of it, for a reason, as sort of the foundation for this triangle, is all of those psychological and social variables. And that means things like your thoughts and your emotions and your behaviors, your personality, things like your social circles, the support that you have from people around you, and indeed things like sport culture. So all of those things, that the ways in which we interact with ourselves and those around us, will have a play and role in the ways in which we navigate all of the seesaw of what the sport is. The goal is obviously, like I said, to stay more on the peak performance side, but sometimes the three sides of the triangle may not be all aligned nicely. So for example, we may spend a way more time in the technical and tactical aspects in the pool, and then we have a lot of social stressors that come with being in school, and we start ignoring some of those biological factors such as sleep or nutrition. Then our seesaw becomes a little lopsided because the triangle is no longer evenly split out. And when it becomes lopsided, then that means that the balancing act between the injury and peak performance becomes a little bit more difficult. And there's increases the chances of us getting injured. All right, so let's think about this in a way in that what can we then do to make sure that we address these things, that if our performance is indeed like being on a seesaw. Well, if you think about the athletic performance board, the one that has the peak performance and the injury on the other side, I want you to ask yourself, how much time do I spend on the injury side of the board? So not necessarily all the way to the injury that actually stops you from training, but somewhere in the middle where you might have a little bit of shoulder pains, a little bit of ab pains, you may get sick a lot, you might have some colds and flus. How much time do you actually spend on that side? During a typical season, what factors are those that actually allows and helps you to stay on the performance side of the board? So get you to the point that you can now not only recover from what's going on, but actually try to increase and be better. What factors do you think for you are likely to push you towards that injury side? Then let's think about the base triangle that I talked about. It's really important that you start asking yourself, how much effort do I invest on my technical or tactical side? What are the areas that I could improve on? Do I attend practices regularly? And when I'm there, do I actually put in full effort, or do I kind of like swim around and have a little bit of fun there and not really focus on what I'm supposed to do? Same way, I think it's important to consider, how much effort do I invest on my physical and the biological side? What are those areas that I could improve on there? Am I spending too much time on my cell phone? Am I going to bed early? Am I eating regularly? And all those kind of things. Am I making sure that I stretch after each of my practices? And last but not least, how much effort do I invest on my psychological and sociocultural side? Am I making sure that I control my mood? Am I making sure that I'm reducing stressors in my life? Am I making sure that I'm having fun outside of swimming and not just focused on swimming? Are there any areas that you could improve on when it comes to looking at that psychological and sociocultural side of the triangle? All right. Then the second top tip that I have, which I think it's a really important philosophy for swimmers, that in this sport, particularly when you reach the 13 and overs and you get used to the idea of doing taper meets, usually how the training goes is that you train really hard for 6 months or 4, depending on the season, if you're doing a high school season, a long course and a short course, but you get the gist what I'm talking about here. You train really hard for about 6 months, trying to be great for 3 days. What that means is consistent with what we know from the literature and statistics that exist on people's swimmings. Usually the season is filled with ups and downs. So in that process of actually training, you're not likely to get season best or personal best along the way. And indeed, it may look like something like the graph that I actually put out there. And usually the goal is then when you get to the end of the season and you taper for that season ending meet, that's when you're hoping to hit the best mark and find yourself in that peak performance aspect of that CISO board. If we really look at this a little bit deeper, taper actually is not just about how much yardage you drop down, but the whole point and purpose of taper is to make sure that you are using that non-linear reduction of the training volume to optimize yourself to be physically and mentally ready to race. So it's not just a physiological rest that you do, but it's also changing and shaping the attitudes in your mindset to be able to optimize the sports in a way that then gives you the best chance of success, reaching those peak season best and personal best when you do the taper meet. Research is also very sure and very systematically found that when swimming performance typically improves rapidly between ages 8 and 13, and then it starts diminishes as you approach the top performance potentials around the age of 18. This makes sense because times get faster, so the drops that you get are going to be smaller as you age. So the likelihood of those season bests and personal bests are going to get less. That doesn't mean they don't exist. It just means that they're going to happen less frequently. So I think the important part of here is to recognize that, you know what, I'm going to have my ups and downs. But in order for me to then give myself a chance to be great for those 3 days, I'm going to have to train really hard for the remainder of the season, because we all know that taper doesn't happen if you haven't put in the work to actually make it happen when it's time. So let's look at some of those critical questions. To help you prepare for the sport of swimming and recognizing all the daily grind that happens during the season, I think it's important to maybe shape ourselves to think about how do we define success? Knowing what we know, that as you age, your performance drops in terms of time are going to get less and less. That doesn't mean they don't exist, but you're going to hope for those hundreds of seconds of drops rather than those 15-second drops that you got when you were 8. I think it's important that we start thinking about success in some other ways than just the times. So I think it's important that you as an athlete can sort of say, well, how do I define success? How does my definition of success include any outcome-focused factors? That means things like winning a medal, making the A final, you know, getting this cut, getting that cut. Or are those time-focused factors? Getting a new best time? Or is it more flexible that you're staying with a certain margin of a current best time? Does your success have any performance-focused factors? So things like quality of execution of a race strategy. So for example, I was able to hold my breath. I didn't hold it. I didn't breathe on every set, every other, but I breathed on every third. Things like that. Is there any success factors that are about mastery? Hitting your walls the right way, making sure that your timing of your backstroke turn is exactly where you want it to be. Does your definition of success have any process-focused factors? Things like, oh, did I attend practice? Did I put in my effort while I was at practicing? Was I able to manage the stressors that come with school and swimming and all that kind of stuff? Or was I able to make my sleep routine better? The other part of this definition of success is like, well, what does it mean in different types of meets? If I go to a regular everyday dual meet, or if I go to a season starting meet, what's my success factor that I define that this was a successful meet? Does that change when you get to the bigger meets then, when you get to the taper meet, the season meet, the championships meet? Does the focus in terms of how much outcome focused or time focused or performance focused or process focused factors that you consider as to be successful, does the balance of those change depending on the meet? Another aspect to think about this, that since we are training 6 months to be great for 3 days, how do I prepare for taper? Do I actually just do the things in the pool, or do I prepare it outside of the life too? Things like, how do I navigate my schoolwork leading up to the meet? How do I make sure that when I do enter the championship meet, I don't have any other essays due from my professors or my teachers the day off or the day after? And knowing what you now know about the athlete performance seesaw that I earlier talked about, are there anything, or how could you better prepare yourself to a successful taper meet during the season? So thinking about those three triangles side, the technical and tactical, and the physical and the biological, as well as the psychological and social cultural factors, is there anything that you could do a little bit better? All right, this is one of my favorites. Raise confidence actually comes from well-executed physical and mental practices. Very rarely does anybody show up behind the blocks knowing they haven't trained well for months, and all of a sudden they get a brand new cut. I mean, it happens when you're younger and very rarely when you're older. It does happen, I'm not saying that. But I think typically what you want to do is that when you step behind those blocks and you hear the 5 whistles, you're going to get ready. And then you hear the one very long whistle, and as you're about to step up, the only thing in your mind should be like, I got this. I know what I need to do to be able to swim the ways in which I want to get the outcome that I want. If we look at the literature, we know that confidence comes from 9 main sources. One is about mastering the skills. Second one is being able to demonstrate ability to do and execute those skills. Confidence comes from being physically and mentally prepared. And I would actually argue that sometimes it's not just physical and mental preparing, but it's also that to be able to put aside those other stressors that are part of your life, like school, being tangibly prepared, that you have the right kind of snacks and food for your meets. It also comes from strong and powerful physical presence. So in my mind, when you're thinking about selecting a tech suit when you get older, I think that's important. So pay attention to what makes you feel good rather than what everybody else has. Sometimes that one type of suit may not fit you, but it may fit somebody else really well. So I think it's really important that the clothing that you wear, I know how difficult, particularly for girls, it is to put on those tech suits. But if you feel confident in the suit rather than it's kind of like ill-fitting, you will feel stronger and more powerful and more confident. Same goes for practice suits. If you're constantly having to change it or move it, or it kind of feels a little bit weird, then you're wearing the wrong kind of suit, or at least wrong size suit. So you need to make sure that whatever you wear, whether it's goggles, whether it's suit, that you feel strong and powerful in it. I'm not saying you need to go back to your parents and say, I need to buy a new suit. But most places, Elsmore, for example, allows you to try them on. So make sure that you pay attention to picking out the suit that makes you feel strong and powerful. Another aspect where confidence comes from beyond those well-executed physical and mental practices is having a really good social support. So knowing that those people around you are there for you, and their love is not dependent on the fact that you do well in swimming. So I think that's important. So having a good relationship with your coach or teammates or friends or family or siblings, all of those things are absolutely vital part of giving you confidence. The next one is a little bit of a different, bigger word. Confidence comes from vicarious experiences. What that means is that it's really powerful for you to watch somebody else do what you want to do. So watching other people swim, watching the heats before, I said, hey, that person was able to do the split with 35. I know I can do that if that's what I'm going to do. YouTube is free, and it also helps you to watch your own performances where you know that you were absolutely fantastic. You know the ways in which you hit your walls were spot on, perfect. So having those vicarious experiences where you watch yourself or somebody else achieve what you want to achieve can have a major, major impact on your confidence. Another source of confidence is coach and the coach leadership. It's no surprise that if you don't trust your coach, it's very unlikely that you're going to do well under that coaching. And I think it's really important that you address and build that relationship with your coach in a way that you have the right and you feel confident enough to actually say about things that bother you. So once you get older, as you get sort of the 13 and overs, you are going to be the best judge of your own body. You know what made you feel better. You know what didn't make you feel better. So learning how to communicate with your coach is an essential part of creating a relationship with the coach that then helps you build your confidence. A couple of other things that we have very little control over is things like environmental comfort. So if you really feel comfortable and comforted in the environment that you're in, I think that's important. So think about a meet that you're there for a whole day and it's super hot. And if you feel like sitting on those bleachers is hurting your feet and you feel totally hot, you can't breathe properly and you feel lethargic, move yourself from that situation. Find a spot where you can actually become comfortable so you can reset yourself before the next rate. So I think those kind of things are really important. Same way, the situational comfortableness, what I mean by that is things like knowing how much time do you have between each of your events. That doesn't mean that you get to control that, but recognizing that, you know what, these two events are going to be really close. There's a chance that I'm not going to fully recover for the second one if I put my full effort on the other one. So then we can go back and say, what are the sacrifices that I can make? Which one is going to be my focus today? And which one I'm going to change my goals and definition of success for so that it actually works really well and I'm still going to get what I need from it. So I think that's an important part to look at all of those things. So if we really think about this, like what are the critical questions that I think you as an athlete could do? So knowing that race confidence comes from those well-executed physical mental practices. So making sure that you are putting in the effort and you become confident in your ability and your skills. To boost your confidence after each practice, I would recommend asking yourself, what did I do well today? What part of my practice am I the most proud of? What is the one thing that I can improve on next time? What is the one thing that gave me confidence that I'm on the right track towards my goal? Bearing in mind that you will train for multiple months to be great for a couple of days, it's really important that we sustain that path, that we're on the right path. And if you are an athlete who likes to journal, who has like a practice journal, I would recommend that you put these 4 questions as part of your every night reflection on how that practice went. Once you've answered those, they don't have to be long. They can be bullet points. That's it. Practice and swimming thinking, stop for the day, and you can move on other things. All right, let's move on. So top tip number 4, commitment to swimming does not guarantee objective performance outcomes. So while we can do everything in our power, set really good goals and do everything that we want, that doesn't mean that we always get the times that we want. And that's because, like I said, any athletic performance is like a seesaw. We have the base triangle that sometimes get crooked because you might get ill, you might have a lot of things that happened in school. And therefore, we find ourselves not to be on the right side of the board, but closer to the injury or actually injured, which means that while we commit to everything going right, sometimes it just doesn't guarantee those objective performance outcomes. So to make sure that we can sustain our and understand why we do this, I think it's really important that we actually also ask, what is your why? Why do you swim? What are the things that you love about swimming so much that helps you get through these ups and downs that happen between and within the season for sure? I can guarantee that beyond the fact that I love it because it's fun, usually those whys kind of fall under those three different categories that I'm saying there. One of the whys you swim is because it facilitates your sense of relatedness. So you feel like you belong. Whether that's belong in the water, whether that's belonging with the friendships that you have, whether that's because just being though in the water is fun, but one of those reasons, typically, whatever that is, would fall in the category that it facilitates your sense of being part of something. Another category where your why typically would fall, it facilitates your sense of competence. It makes you feel like you can. And that can mean things like you can push yourself to your limits. You can master new skills. You can relieve your stress and you can win. Being able to do all of these things actually makes swimming fun. Another category where the why could be it facilitates your sense of autonomy. In other words, you feel like you're in control and you have some choice. It's often when you're little, it's one of those places where it's like, this is my space and this is my sport. It's not my parents. I'm better than my parents. That doesn't mean obviously families who have generations have done swimming, but it's fun because it's yours and you get to be in charge of what you do there. So all of these three things are super, super important when it comes to having motivation to compete and having motivation to train. And that means that when you have the why and you know what the why is, you're more likely to put intensity and effort into everything that you do. And then you can define your success in a way that doesn't always just focus on the times. I guarantee swimming will stay fun for you for a very long time. So I think it's important that we recognize that it's really important to facilitate and try to get people to support those autonomy and competence and related actions. Not only is it important for you to get that from your coaches and your parents and your teammates, it's also really important that you help your teammates to achieve the same. Remember, I showed that picture in the beginning where we talked about you being in the middle and then all of the supporting network being the second tier. Well, one helps the other. So if you really want to think about what would this look like to help somebody have the autonomy, like I can do this. It usually looks like using words and behaviors that helps the person to understand, acknowledge individual preferences and points of view. Like they are valid. Recognizing not everybody has the same views and not everybody thinks the same is really important part of that. Autonomy can also be supported by giving a rationale for required and desired behaviors and by offering choices. So having these conversations with your friends even is like, hey, do you want to do this and this and this or this, can be helping them feel like, hey, I have a choice in this and my voice matter. Same way, a competence can usually look like something that somebody's encouraging individuals to be initiative in their actions. So you might hear your parents to say, go for it, even though it's scary. Same way you can tell your friends to go for it, even though it may be scary. Competence can be supported by the person's wishes on how to best support them by, do you want to give or do you want not giving the feedback and giving them space to take control. So for example, it's really important that you as an athlete tell your parents how you want them to support you. So if you want them to video your performances when you go and race, ask them to do that. If you want them to be the loud mom in the bleachers who screams, you can ask them to do that. Or if you say, you know what, I don't want you to be the loud mom, and I don't really want you to give me any feedback after I perform, good or bad. Give me some time to explain this and process it myself, then I'll start talking. So I think it's really important that you have those conversations with your parents to give you that space and ways in which they can support you the best. The last but not least, basic need support for relatedness looks like somebody showing interest in their activities and showing genuine empathy when faced with the disappointment. It also means that you make sure that the person knows that your love and care for them is not dependent on performance accomplishment. So if you have a coach who does this, you know they actually care about you. If you have parents who does this, you know they really care about you. And this is the ways in which you can then show that to your teammates as well. Let's move forward. All right, this is one of my favorites. Swimming is a sport where we really focus on a lot of those little details. It's like position of a neck, or the ways in which you put your hands, the ways in which you move your feet, things like that. So it's very, very, very common for people to kind of start focusing on perfecting those skills and perfecting those tiny little things. Well, when it comes to sport and when it comes to the psychology and having a healthy attitude of how you can be the best you can be, I think it's important to separate the difference between and understand the difference between perfections and excellence. So perfection means that something is flawless, and it's a flawless state where everything is exactly right. It can be also an action of trying to make something perfect by creating a condition where everything is 100% great. Well, while that's a lot of things that often in sport we strive for, in a swimming, when we're looking at things that happen super fast, when you are fighting for those hundreds of seconds, very rarely will you reach perfection. Or indeed, if you do reach the perfection, it usually you say, you know what, but I can be better. So it's something, it's a state of mind that very rarely is actually achieved. Excellence, on the other hand, is the quality of excelling and being at best at something. Sometimes you can reach excellence by putting 80% effort, and sometimes you can kind of like, you may have to put a little bit more. But it's not a flawless state, but it's rather something that is really characterized by really a bunch of really good qualities in a very high degree, but it kind of gives you room not to be fully perfect. While perfection is not inherently a bad thing, it can become really problematic when the drive and those unrealistic expectations becomes based on fear. And then when that happens, it starts eating up your self-confidence, identity, and impact the life and relationship. So if we aim for excellence, we are aiming to perform in a way that gives us the desired outcomes. And all of those thoughts are not based on fear. We see mistakes as really, it's a part of learning and it's part of the package. But if we aim for perfection, then typically mistakes are not seen as something that is part of sport, but actually an extension of how good I am as a person. So I would always say that aim for excellence, not perfection, because perfection doesn't exist. And excellence can actually embrace those moments of learning. And sometimes you can reach the desired outcome by having a couple of mistakes in it. So if we're going to start redefining success, like I talked about in top tip 2, you can start thinking about shifting your thinking away from the need to be perfection in things and rather focus on excellence. I think this is a really great exercise that you could start thinking about how does these kind of fit with you, and kind of think about when you read them, which one resonates with you? Are there any others that you find really inspiring or impactful? And those can become sort of your mantra and your thought processes to help you kind of shift that thinking away from perfection, for the quest to perfection towards that excellence. So what I like about these is that I think they're very powerful because they're only a couple of words. So for example, excellence inspires, perfection ridicules the person. Excellence is calm, perfection is stiff. There's no room for flexibility. Excellence can liberate, perfection subjugates. At times, excellence can be achieved with a little bit less effort, and perfection is not even real. There's always room for improvement. All right, so let's go to the next one, and this one where you get your first finished phase, a phrase that I promised you. And this top tip is that it is super hard to compete against somebody who's having fun. I'm sure everybody has been on deck and you've seen a couple of people really having fun there, totally like lifting up their batteries, their social battery, their emotional batteries are super high. And it kind of makes you feel like, I just want to fall into here, and it kind of sucks the energy out of you. Well, typically in the past, we've always seen fun as something that is goofing around and giggly and fun and games. But research in sports psychology has actually started to challenge that perception. And it started to challenge the perception that having fun in sport and wanting to be the best and winning are somehow, they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, and that they can't happen at the same time. So that's the notion that has existed, and we started to challenge that. In fact, science has actually identified that what makes sport fun for youth athletes is working hard, pushing your boundaries, taking those calculated risks that allows you to excel, having great teammates, and coaches and parents who create positive sport culture. And in fact, the science also says that fun is an integral part of youth athlete participation motivation in pursuit of that sport excellence. So if we're having fun while we put in the intensity and effort, we're likely to achieve what we want. But often when I talk to my athletes that I work with, they say, well, when I was little, I had so much fun in my sport, and that's how you started it. But then it's like, well, then I started taking my sport seriously. And then all of a sudden the nerves came in, anxiety kicked in, and so forth. So what I'm trying to challenge here is that fun doesn't have to be goofing around and not taking things seriously. Fun, indeed, in sport is about working hard, pushing your boundaries, and having great teammates and coaches who will create that culture. So the word here that I use, instead of, I never wish my daughter good luck when she goes to a meet, I always tell her to have fun, and I usually say it in my native Finnish, which means pidä hauskaa. And in this aspect, and for this tip, I think the one question that you need to ask yourself is, what makes sport fun for you? All right. Let's get to some more serious stuff here. The top tip 7, and I want to recognize this because most of you who are either in middle school, high school, or then beyond, COVID-19 has actually caused unprecedented mental health concerns in sport. And that, I think, is important to recognize that COVID has had a negative effect on mental health and well-being amongst US adolescent athletes. And it doesn't seem to be going away. So I think it's really important that you recognize that it's okay not to be okay at times, and it's okay to talk about it and seek help. And the ways in which I kind of want to phrase this one here, that know that you're not alone. And there are a couple of helpful points that I think it's important. If you feel that you're not okay, you need to know that there's always adults around who are willing to help you. So I want you to be brave in reaching out to your parents, guardians, teachers, school counselors, coaches, or even teammates. Sometimes it may be that you reach out to a person and they're not the right person to help you move forward, but they will for sure find out the next person who is the best kind of coach to get you through this. And I want you to also recognize that seeking help is not a sign of weakness, but quite the opposite. It really takes a lot of strength and courage to say, I need help. But I think we need to start normalizing that sometimes we really do need help, and we should be talking to others. And what I also want to say here is that taking care of your mental health is just as important as your physical health. Remember that base triangle in your seesaw that I showed? There's a reason why the psychological and sociocultural factors form that foundational side of the triangle and are closest to the ground to keep your seesaw moving and balanced as it should be. Top tip number 8. This is what I really like to tell my athletes. I said, your body is talking to you if you're willing to listen. So when we are under stress, and I think swimming and sport in general has a really fun relationship when it comes to stress. We purposefully, when we are doing workouts and when we are trying to be better, trying to become faster, we actually put our body through a lot of physical stress on purpose. So the whole idea is that we are pushing ourselves to the limits to stress all the muscles and things in our body so that we can reach the next level. If we're not careful though, and we don't take care of those sides in a way that promotes that recovery as well, we're more likely to then encounter situations what pushes us on that seesaw board towards the injury and illness or overtraining. We also know that athletes undergo a lot of mental stress as well. And sometimes the stress that we have from schools, such as exams and things like that, can spill over to other aspects of our lives. So I think it's really important that we start listening to what our body is telling us. Sometimes it sends a little hints and say, hey, I'm a little overstressed now. Can you help me by massaging it? Or can you help me by stretching? Can you help me by foam rolling? If we find ourselves having a low mood and a lot of emotions that go up and down, and we realize that we haven't really slept properly in the last few nights, that's your body's way telling you that, hey, I think we need a little bit more sleep and rest. Most swimmers know the feeling of hangry when you haven't eaten enough and your mood changes. So what I'm saying here, I think it's really important that you start listening to your body and listen to the signs that your body is telling you, because the body talks very loud and clear if you're willing to listen. So when it comes to stress, the short-term stress is actually good. So for example, working hard at practice is actually a really good thing. Long-term stress can lead to mental health problems. And having an imbalance between stress and recovery can also lead to those other negative consequences like overreaching, overtraining, burnout, illness, or injury. So recognizing when it's time to look at and ease up so that we can stay on the right side of that seesaw board, it's really important that we hear that body. There are a number of signs that the body sends you. Some of them are physical signs and symptoms. Some of them are behavior signs and symptoms. Some of them are emotional signs and symptoms. And then there's cognitive signs and symptoms and social signs and symptoms. In the infographics that I'm going to put on the Wisconsin swimming website after this, you can go and have a look at. There's a whole list of things that you can see. And I think it's really important that you as well, in addition to your parents, recognize when there is a big shift in these things and you're starting to see these symptoms that aren't very typical for you. All right, getting closer. Top tip number 9, there is no harm in seeking mental health or mental performance support. I think it's important that youth athletes in particular learn how to cope with different things that they're thrown at them, whether it comes from school, whether it comes from sport or life in general. I think it's important that if you feel like the things that you have, whether it's time management, stress management, sports performance, anxiety management, all of those things that are kind of like part of what you do, become unmanageable and you feel like they're taking over, I think it's really important that you say, you know what, I think I need to see somebody to help me, not just for those mental health related factors, but maybe the mental performance related things. So for that, I think it's important that you seek to find a person who actually understands and is properly trained to treat athletes. Because I think athletes have different stressors, different factors, and the ways in which they think, that it's really important that you seek somebody who says, kind of like when you have a physical injury, if you go to a physiotherapist who doesn't treat athletes, they say, oh, just take rest for 3 weeks. Well, you know, that's not an option. But if you go to a physiotherapist who actually works with athletes, they're able to find modifications and things that keeps you still active rather than takes you fully out of your sport. So having different coping skills is really important. And if you feel like you don't have them as much as you want, making sure you seek the right kind of person to help you with those is really important. So how I would think about this. So when it comes to things like anxiety and stress associated with sport and or competition, first, I think it's important you fix the fundamentals. So making sure that your base triangle is in order. So your nutrition, hydration, sleeps, finding the balance between school and sport and other extracurriculars and life in general is getting back to where it needs to be. If fixing those fundamentals does not seem to resolve your problems, then it's a good time to seek help from a professional. And as an athlete, seeing somebody who's a certified mental performance consultant would be a really good first start because it gives you somebody who's actually trained to work with athletes. All right, we're in Wisconsin. I couldn't do this without having Giannis in one of my slides. And he actually says a lot of good things that when it comes to having a healthy mindset and towards success. One of the things that he made it very controversial, I'm sure all of you remember from last year, where he said there's no failure in sport, it's just steps to success. And I could not agree with him more, because I do think that if the fact that somebody doesn't make it to the playoffs or the finals is always a failure, then that means that the league has, in NBA, for example, has a lot of failing teams. And that's not true. There's a lot of steps that one can take and can be really successful, but then comes other steps when the balance in the seesaw may not be right, that you just couldn't make the last cut, or the journey stopped shorter than you wanted it to. To help us in those steps, I think it's important that we set goals. And those goals I already talked about a little bit, that they're not always just about the times or making it to the A finals or winning, but it's also about the things that you learned in terms of your performance in the process. And we know that having goals that are somewhat flexible in things can be very helpful in sustaining that motivation over the 6 months that you train towards trying to be great for 3 days. So part of this goal setting process, I think it's really important that athletes also understand some of the key principles of practice and success. And I think these are my top 6. I really like them because I think they kind of make sense in lots of different ways. So first one, if you don't train, you don't gain. Commitment to practice attendance and practicing with effort and intentionality is the key to success, particularly in sport like swimming. And not all practices should be easy. Some practices should really feel bad, as in hard. Some should be like, nah, that was fine. And some should really feel great, easy. That means that you are pushing yourself beyond what is easy and comfortable, but you're also recognizing that you have now regained something because it no longer feels hard. Performance gains in swimming are dependent on what happens in and out of the pool, physically and mentally. So going back to the triangle that forms the foundation for sport, I think it's really important. And sometimes, especially when you're going through a growth spurt, maintaining your times is actually progress. Because as you grow, your muscles grow, your bones grow, and they're not really balanced, your technique falls apart, and you feel like you are a little Bambi in the water who doesn't know how to manage that. So I think this is really important to remember that sometimes, especially during growth spurts or when you're changing your stroke to be better serving for you when you move to college, sometimes maintenance of times is actually progress. We also need to recognize that actually there are more than one staircase to the same destination. So while you may think this is the linear path you're going to take, there can be other ways, and sometimes you take a detour, but you can still make it to the same destination. And commitment to these steps is the best path to give yourself a best chance of success. That doesn't guarantee success, but it gives you the best chance of success. And I always like to put a bonus tip. And this is coming straight from Ted Lasso. He says to, in one of the first season, the second episode, he says to Sam, "Hey, Sam, come here a sec. You know what the happiest animal on earth is? It's a goldfish. You know why? It got a 10-second memory. Be a goldfish, Sam." So elephant remembers for years on end, and, goldfish kind of forgets. Scientifically, this is not actually accurate. But I think the mentality of this is absolutely fantastic. So we need to make sure that when we do have those disappointments, when we don't reach the things that we want, it's important that we let go, learn from the mistake and let go. Because we don't want that same race to beat us twice. Because if we keep on holding to that, then it just happens over and over again. And then the fun, what you were supposed to have, kind of disappears from it. So be a goldfish, not an elephant. All right, your last word that happens. So the finished word, I promised, I will say kiitos, which means thank you. And in here, you're going to see a slide that shows the Wisconsin programs. And in here, there's going to be a tab that also gives all this presentation as well as all the infographics for athletes for you to see. And with that note, I say thank you, and here's how you can reach me.
Do either of you who are here have any questions?
Do we want to stop the recording so they can ask questions in silent? Yeah,
Sure can.
yeah. Now it's your chance. Ask me questions. Happy to talk to you.